welcome to the Fatherless Cheat Sheet. I'm Andrew, your host, your fatherless friend, your Miller Lite of mentors, if you will. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for listening. Today on the show, we have someone named Adam Tendler. Adam Tendler is a Grammy-nominated pianist. That's right. I said Grammy-nominated. I haven't been nominated for anything in my entire life. Well, there was that one time I got nominated, most likely to get tossed out of a Vegas buffet, which eventually happened. Shout out Bellagio, 2011. We'll talk about that another time. Adam Tendler has a very, very interesting story behind the origin of his latest and Grammy-nominated album, Inheritances. I was watching CBS Sunday Morning, and his story came on. His story is that he and his dad were estranged. He said it best. It was less of a rift and more of a drift. I thought that was very well said. And then he found out unexpectedly his dad died, and he had all these difficult feelings about it. He talks in depth about that. He was very open and personal and shared so much. I appreciated it. Eventually, he received an inheritance in a manila envelope in the parking lot of a Denny's, and it was $10,000. He didn't really know what to do with it. He felt it was frivolous if he spent it on credit cards or anything sort of dubious. So what he did was he commissioned 16 composers to write music for this album, Inheritances, which is very beautiful album, beautiful pieces of music. I listened to it. It's very interesting and just sort of runs the gamut of emotions, which as is with grief, as is with relationships, and it's complex like relationships, any kind of relationships. And we talked about all of that and more. This album was so deeply personal to him, and he shares that every night he performs it, and he shares that album with the composers, the 16 composers who were friends and colleagues, some of whom were also experiencing or had experienced loss of their own fathers. So there was some interesting synchronicity there as well. But overall, he was just a really a kind person and an interesting person and a very talented musician. If you get a chance, you should check out, obviously listen to his music. Inheritances, he has other album, 88 Keys was a previous album as well. He was just so kind to come on our show and share a story that is so relevant to what we talk about, because what we talk about is not just the death of a father, as was in his case. It's also the other ways, the other manifestations of fatherlessness, and how we can fill some of those voids, and how people step in and help out and circle the wagons. We always say that. But anyway, I'll let you hear it for yourself. So Adam Tendler, Grammy-nominated pianist, really interesting guy, the Fatherless Cheat Sheet. Check it out. Hope you like it. Okay, welcome to the Fatherless Cheat Sheet. Adam, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so much, Andrew.
You got it. This is really great. I connected so much with your story. Your story is so appropriate for the Fatherless Cheat Sheet. And, in looking at your work and listening to your work, everything you do is so deeply personal. So I feel like I already have a real sense of who you are, which is really cool. And so anyway, thanks for being here. This is great.
I appreciate that. And it's all real. It gets exhausting because there's not like a personal or a professional side. It really is essential that I mix those two for me to really function and feel. But it's interesting because the work is so personal and people connect with it so personally. That I want to meet that earnestness. I want to meet that authenticity all the time. And it's a good problem to have, but it's interesting because at the end of certain like really intense periods of performance, or when amazing things happen, like the CBS segment, it's interesting because one wants to sort of like meet people where they are, especially if they have these really profound experiences or powerful experiences. But thank you.
Yeah, I would imagine that the authenticity at some point it must drain you because you just lay it all out there.
Yeah, I'm always proud for I'm proud and pleased in a way when the work gets received in a way that feels like it creates a powerful experience for people, because so much of what I play and what I do as a sort of on the objective level can be really difficult. Like it can be dissonant and sort of abstract music or abstract art, whatever. And so on the surface, it could be really difficult. And so I try to sort of put as much as myself into it,
Right.
so that there's entry points for people. And so I'm pleased when I see that happens.
Sure.
But then it's also kind of, it's tricky, sort of like the price tag is that I will have at the end of a concert like Inheritances, people in tears. And
Yeah.
that doesn't make me happy, so to speak, but it makes me sort
Sure.
of feel like, okay, well, this worked. Because this person connected with something that's rather abstract, like music, but also super abstract, like modern
Hmm.
music, contemporary
Yeah.
music. And somehow the way that this was crafted or the way that this was shaped and delivered to them, they tapped into it in a really, really powerful way.
Yeah.
You can't predict that, but you hope,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's art, right? That's art when you can get that you could evoke something in somebody, make them feel something with what you do and what you play or paint or whatever the
Yeah.
thing is. Um,
But when
I'm
it
just gonna
happens, sort of the responsibility of it can feel, um, it's a privilege, but it can feel really, you almost don't know what to do.
yeah,
You don't know how to meet it
yeah,
sometimes. It's some of my least favorite kind of moments are the moments where I feel sort of like the least myself actually is actually right
mhm,
after a show. Because people
that's interesting.
congratulate and this or that. And it's actually not this moment of like, oh, this is what it's all about. I feel so
Right.
great. This is so perfect. Thank goodness everyone loves me. It's actually like a very weird feeling because you're split in a million directions, and
Yeah,
it's really hard to kind of feel authentic, even though one is.
yeah,
But anyway, but it's so with a
yeah,
project like Inheritances, that happens a lot. And so after like the CBS Sunday Morning show aired, or after the Grammy nom, these are all great things. But of course, my inbox filled up with really personal stories, and I don't want to just like
yeah.
archive them.
Sure.
And as a concert pianist, it's a kind of interesting role to be put in because I'm having people talk to me about being a father or being a mother or
Yeah.
losing their spouse. And it's a very, I asked for it because I entered into that arena with this project. But it's just a really interesting kind of place to find myself as sort of like, concert pianist, to be
Yeah.
talking about the big stuff with people, including you now.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that when you and not to sound too precious, because I tried to never do that on this show. I try to go directly at the problem and with some levity as well, but when you lead with authenticity, when that's your North Star and you just go full tilt at, "I'm being honest, this is what happened,
Yeah.
and this is my art, and this is how I perform and what I do," I think you're gonna get that response, and obviously it really made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. I saw the story and I was like, I'm an emotional guy. My eyes well up often at
Yeah.
things. And your story, I couldn't believe my response to it. And I think a lot of people will share that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, leading with authenticity. It's sort of like I almost have no choice but to do that.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, it's just, it can be exhausting. It can be, um, but yeah, I kind of had to do, and it's risky. I think
Yeah.
another interesting thing about this project, which I could talk more about,
Yeah.
um, your listeners might be like, what is Adam talking about? But
No.
I, but I think it's interesting. The people I've been most nervous about uh, seeing Inheritances or witnessing it is like, for instance, my stepmom, who
Mhm.
and my stepbrother, or sorry, my half brother, who they lived with my father, and their experience of my father is so different from the experience that I had of my father, especially in my adulthood. And
Yeah.
so their experience of him at the time of his death and leading up to it was so different from mine. And it's so
Mhm.
interesting, like Fatherless Cheat Sheet. Like, I look at that, even that title, and I thought to my first thought was, I was, in a way, felt fatherless before he passed away. That was the real
Sure.
dilemma of his death, in a way, was I
Yeah.
thought, well, how do I grieve this person with whom I share a really deep kind of origin story and a deep past? But how do I grieve this person who I didn't, at the time of his death, I didn't speak to more than maybe once or twice a
Mhm.
year, and whose it didn't go, in a way, I'm grateful for it, but in the story, it didn't go much into how our politics had sort of drifted and how we as
Yeah.
people had sort of become quite different. And there was
Mhm.
no love lost, but we had become just very different people. And so I
Right.
was grieving that loss, not losing him, but I was grieving the loss of that relationship well before he passed away. And I was constantly trying to sort of like do sort of like 3D chess in my mind of how can I was like, he's not going to do it. So how can I rescue this relationship? Okay, another year just passed by. What if I call once a month? Like I was constantly sort of thinking
Yeah.
about how can I get us closer to what we were. I'm his son, you know.
Yeah.
It never quite happened. So when he died, it was a real I don't know. I was just sort of shell shocked by it because it was more like I was disappointed. I was
Mm-hmm.
grieving. I was sad, but I was also disappointed. I'm like, we didn't do that, and I
Yeah.
didn't do that, and there was a sense of like, hey, you know, I was supposed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when people die in our lives, I don't think it's actually an unusual response to like have a first reaction, or one of the first reactions is regret. I didn't do
Mm-hmm.
this. Oh, what was the last thing I said? Did they write me and I didn't write them back? Like, I think that that's natural. And I think when
Sure.
my dad passed away, that happened, but it was kind of like this multi-dimensional, multi-era version of it where I was just like, I didn't know what to grieve first in a way.
Yeah.
But to go back to what I was saying before, it's easy for me to sort of like analyze this relationship from a distance because it was already at a distance, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Whereas I get nervous about presenting someone like my stepmother or my half brother who, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean this in a good way, like worshipped him in a way.
Yeah.
And it kind of held him to a certain esteem that I didn't, frankly, but I also didn't like hold him in a negative esteem. But
Sure.
it was just different. And so I'm always very conscious and a little nervous and anxious. And frankly, I was nervous before the CBS Sunday Morning
Yeah.
special came out. I didn't tell them the date. I was like, I just was nervous because I
Sure.
didn't know what they were going to use and if it was going to look like a hit piece. And I
Okay.
was always nervous that this recital, even though my father's scarcely mentioned, I've always been a little nervous that it could be even taken that way. It's sort of
Mm-hmm.
like one or the other I can have trouble with. If it can be, I take sort of not offense, but issue with the idea that it might be a hit piece, which it's not. But also when
Yeah.
people say this is an amazing tribute to him, I'm like, well, it's also not that either.
Sure. Yeah.
It's sort of like we're carving out a space to sort of recognize that there are relationships in this world that are not good or bad, toxic or healthy, but
Sure.
that live in this sort of in between space. And so many of us experience our relationships that way.
That's so true, and it's a complex relationship, and I think the complexities of that relationship are mirrored within the album, and there's so much to it. There's so much feeling. I have a question for you. Without words, how the hell do you make people feel like like that? I mean, it's unbelievable.
To be honest,
And there are
Andrew,
some, yeah,
it's amazing to me when it happens. So
yeah,
and also, by the way, none of these pieces are mine. I didn't write
hmm,
them. So I think, and sometimes I get leveled with that question, like, why didn't I write one? Because I write music occasionally. I don't
sure,
call myself a capital C composer really, but some people said like, well, why didn't you write one? Why didn't you write a
hmm,
17th piece? And I didn't want there to have a sense that like, well, here's the definitive experience of
sure,
my experience, and here's mine, and mine is the
mhm,
big one. It was more like, I just think it's actually more interesting to sort of like present the situation of my father passed away. It was super unexpected. The circumstances of it are not incredibly clear to me.
mhm,
Um, and we loved each other, but we didn't really talk. We drifted, and he left me a hunk of cash in an envelope. It was passed to me at a Denny's parking lot, and I'm going to
right,
give it to you. I'm going to give it all to you, my friends, if you just write me a piece, and it's going to help me because we did a thing called a funeral and a burial
mhm,
and a viewing. We did all these rituals, and it lasted a couple days. And then at the end of those couple days, I was literally in this exact spot where I'm talking to you, and I'm back to work and I'm
right,
practicing for the next show. And I was like, I don't know what that just was. If that's grief, then I want a refund because I don't know what that was. And so I presented them with that premise and they wrote these pieces. And to me, that was far more interesting to see where they would run with that idea. A lot of classical pianists or a lot of classical musicians or people in this world, they have something called style guides. Sorry. Going through puberty. Style guides where they say, this is what I do, this is what I don't, here's my strength, here's my weaknesses, and write to it. And I don't do that. And I didn't want to. And I just said, just run with this. So to answer your kind of question is that I didn't know what I was going to get back, and I didn't know if I arranged these pieces in a particular way, if it was going to do what we talked about before, which was activate this experience for people. Because there's only one piece where I speak, really, and speak actually to the situation. It's at the very end. Everything else kind of is
That was like a journal entry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that was like phenomenal. It's like a journal entry, that piece.
I'm so glad you heard that one. It's incredible. And so when I played this, for instance, in Vermont, or, and the reason I bring up Vermont is because that's not like a metropolitan area. It's not like playing it even in Houston or New York City or San Francisco, where people might even be versed in having these kind of experiences or versed in contemporary art or contemporary music. I played it in my hometown, which I really was very important to me to do. And people just came up. And again, I'm not happy that they were in tears, but they were in tears. And I had the same sort of question and awe that you are presenting, which was, I was like, wow, because this is modern music. Like I also didn't tell these composers like dumb it down, make it pretty, blah blah blah. They just did what they did, and somehow it was creating this sort of safe space to sort of like puncture whatever people needed to get punctured, and stuff just comes out. And so it's magical. I can't quite explain it. And again, it's not like there's some really, really linear narrative that says what happened, and there's this like tear-jerking scene at the end. Not really. And it happens for different people at different times in the program, which I find also really interesting. Just to speak to that piece where I actually do talk, I'm not even letting you talk in this podcast.
That's so okay. I want to hear what you have to say. But my listeners hear me all the time. They've had enough of listening to me, believe me. No, we want to hear what you have to say.
No, so the piece where I actually do talk, that composer designed that piece as sort of like an impromptu, almost like therapy session, where I was supposed to be responding to questions in real time. And the creative side of me was like, ooh, that sounds so interesting, la, la, la. But the practical side of me was like, well, that might not work every night if I've like had a bad burrito or I'm pissed off, like, I don't know. I'm not always going to tap into this amazing cathartic experience. So I also just so happened to have responded to another composer who had asked me questions about my dad. And this was quite early in the process. And his name is Scott Wolschlager. And he wrote to me, he's like, well, tell me, and these weren't deep questions. It's like, what was he like? What was your relationship like? It was really like pretty binary questions. And I had resisted that. And I resisted even kind of exploring that with a lot of these composers, because from the get-go, I was like, please don't write about this relationship. In a way, this relationship is not that interesting. It's not interesting enough for you to narrate it, I was like, I don't want to really go into it. And I don't even think it's interesting for an audience to be like, oh my God, let's buckle up for Adam's relationship with his dad. It's like, there's not much there. That's kind of also the point. But eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to answer these questions. And I just did like several weeks of just stream of conscious, like responses. And so at the end, I had this like document, which I shared with him and then shared with the others kind of reluctantly, but I'm like, if he has it, you should have it. And if that helps you, great, but please still don't write about my dad. And so that I pulled from that for that piece. So everything you hear in that journal entry, it's funny you use that term because that's exactly what it was. That was a journal. That was very raw writing. And basically I pulled from that to create the text for that piece by Darian Donovan Thomas.
It was incredible. It was really great. And a couple things sort of resonated. I love the part, but I really found the part interesting when you were pissed that he lied about smoking. I was like, wow, that was such a real thing. And like, you could almost hear your disappointment. And that was like, that wasn't exactly the thing you were so pissed about. It sort of felt like a little bit of a representation of a betrayal, if you will. It was
Yeah,
just
that whenever we get to that, whenever I get to that part when I do it live, I always wonder, like, is this crazy that I'm talking about this? But as a kid, it's the holidays right now, and there's a certain age where kids get obsessed with whether or not you're telling the truth, you
yeah,
know? And I experience that all the time with the young students or whatever. And
sure.
like we're talking about, like, I don't want to say anything about Santa Claus, but I remember the first time that I looked under the bed and saw something that was definitely
Mhm.
going to be a present for me. And I remembered being like shattered in a
Yeah,
way. Um, and then feeling like I have to now this is so crazy because I'm 5 in this
yeah,
scenario, but being sort of shattered that I was lied to in a way. I
yeah,
also felt the loss of sort of my innocence in a way,
sure.
so I was sad about that too, and then also taking on this idea of I have to now pretend that I didn't do that. I just violated someone's trust because was sneaking under the bed.
Right, now you're a
So now I
collaborator.
have to pretend I know that you didn't get this for me, and so it becomes a whole thing.
Yeah,
Um, and so the smoking thing was part of that, though, and
mhm.
there, I'm going to go probably a little too deep,
Go
too
for it.
fast, but
It's okay.
there's parallels to that can feel traumatic, and so
Mhm,
one would be, um, well, I think when children are sort of like presented with a truth and they have to sort of like pretend
mm,
that to me also as a survivor or an experiencer of abuse, that is something that happens. Like
mhm,
you as a child are actually weirdly forced to protect an abuser
mhm.
or forced to sort of like you said, kind of collaborate and be like,
Yeah,
well, I don't want to like shatter my family, so I'm gonna like, and that's a lot for a 6-year-old to take on.
sure.
You know what I mean?
Of
But it
course.
happens actually all the time. And there's pieces in the program that I feel like start to actually dance around that. I wasn't abused by my dad, just to be
Mhm.
clear.
Yeah,
But there's parts in the program that definitely dance around the ideas of choosing violence and choosing abuse of frankly even of a piano when you could choose grace, and it seems shocking in the moment, but I try to tell people make those choices all the time
yeah,
to um but what that does to a child is they have to sort of like, yeah, they have to sort of somehow manage the feelings of people around them. And so
yeah,
for something as simple as Santa. But you're sort of I was still sort of being like, "Okay, I did this thing. I did something bad. I'm bad. I
yeah,
looked. I did a thing. I have to pretend." And so the smoking was also a part of that too. And the other kind of maybe too deep thing is I think when you're dealing with addicts,
yeah,
and again, I'm still, maybe I'm old school. I always am very cautious of what I say about my family. But my dad, when I was very young, struggled with, at least would tell you, that it was alcohol. I do
yeah,
think through his life there was cross addictions and this and that. And when you live with someone who's struggling with addiction, whether you're a child or not, you're doing, I feel like, many things at once, which is like
yeah.
you're trying to keep control over
Mhm.
a home that might become chaotic or a person who might become chaotic, and you're trying to present yourself to the world in a certain way. And
Yeah,
oftentimes I find with the addict themselves, you're pretending you don't know. It's Santa
right.
all over again, where it's like, I know you're doing this thing. I'm going to pretend I don't know you're doing that thing. Or I'm going to
Yeah,
pretend like it's okay. And
sure.
that happened with my father a lot. I remember, yeah, God, I can't believe I
Yeah.
say it.
Well,
I
there was
remember
a that's a
he had a spray when I was in my teens that would spray in his mouth. This is sort of like the cigarette thing though, where
sure.
I was like, what's he spraying in his mouth all the time? And he would say it was something for his throat, this or that. It was fully vodka. Like it totally
Yeah,
was. I could see the bottle and I could smell it in the spray. I would do all that stuff because I was a child detective.
yeah,
And I still created a story that, like, that's probably my stepmom's. She didn't drink. You know what I mean? I created
yeah.
all this stuff to sort of let him off the hook. And I don't know how we got down that path, but that
No,
idea of
that's
like,
okay.
well, that the smoking thing, because
Yeah,
I knew he did all these things, and I still kind of created narratives to sort of like keep him safe or keep him out of the dark kind of light for me. Um, and but I think that the after effects of that, and I say that in the piece, or it becomes a part of the piece, is like, well, now I think everyone's lying to me all the time, especially if they're loved ones, or especially if they're men who I love. Like I always have this sense that there's what you're telling me, but then there's the real thing. There's the thing that you are or that you do when I'm not there or when the door is shut. So I'm obsessed with that other thing. And so that's where the smoking thing was sort of like one of the original sins of like, you know, a fall from grace, a fall from innocence in a way.
Yeah, and the ideological death of who you thought your father was, that was sort of the beginning of that, it seems. And as you got older, you became more in tune to that. You said something else about when he went down to Tijuana, and the way you put it was so amazing. I'm a writer, so I love words. I love how they're used. And you said something like basically he's going to plug into something.
Yeah, he wanted to.
What did you say?
God, I should know it by heart because I say he was sort of obsessed with penetrating with whatever was beneath the surface there.
That's it. Oh, yeah.
And it was that. He really, and again, but it's so foggy, and that the line I say after is, I might be imagining it, but there was this sense that like, Adam, you stay here, you go to bed, I'm going out there. And I just remember thinking, what are you doing out there? Like, what are you going to access out there? And he was very, very straightforward with me, very kind of like, frankly, quite sex forward with me in the way we would talk about like everything. So I would see like bras under his bed. Like I knew he was sort of like living sort of this, before he was remarried, but living this sort of like, I don't know, like exciting.
He was making his way around town.
It
was.
And so,
it was doing his thing.
Again, there was a mystery to it, sort of like a mystery of like what goes on here and what is going on in your head, and again, and how did I come from that? And like I think as a grown up, and that's part of what this project has actually helped with, in kind of confronting him and his like memory all the time, thinking about him all the time, talking about him all the time. I never did that when he was alive, but it has helped me in a way sort of like forgive myself and sort of kind of constantly think about, okay, well, what are the things I don't like about myself, or what are the things I struggle with? And it, in a way, it kind of humanizes, like it kind of brings his humanity, his imperfection. His imperfection is my imperfection. And it actually lets both of us off the hook in a weird way. It's not like, I was so great, you failed me as a father, but I'm amazing. It's it's not that. In a way, it's the opposite. It's like, wow, I'm older now than you were when I remember growing up. And I think to myself, I can't believe you were raising me and having all these like kind of responsibilities when you were like 10 years older than me, or younger than me, And so in a way, this whole process of sort of living with his memory and having to speak to it and speak to it on stage and live through this music on stage or in the practice room has really helped sort of like flesh out some of like what could have been a very black and white image of like, well, he was an absent father and I'm so great, so how amazing I turned out okay. It really kind of complicates that story in a really good way, I think.
Yeah, and honestly, too, I have to give you just a ton of credit for your emotional intelligence and maturity in that. Let me tell you something. If someone left me 10 grand when I was mourning, I'd probably head right down to AC and do something really stupid.
Believe me, it was right after the holidays too. And I was like, this would be great for my credit cards. This would be great. You know what it's like in New York City, but that money doesn't, $10,000 can disappear in a blink of an eye in the city. Like, and for nothing, and for things that are not very exciting.
No, and things that could get you in real trouble as
and
well.
Things that could get you in real trouble. If I was really following in his footsteps, I would have done that. But it took me a minute to really kind of get there because I also just, this is kind of nerdy, but I had a reputation and I have a reputation for playing all this modern music, this, that, and the other. But I always felt like I'm like sloppy seconds. Like I'm always getting like everyone else's piece, but I never felt like I had the sort of power or the money to commission my own work. And a lot of times that money is given through institutions, and I'm not always everyone's favorite, institutional friend.
Yeah. Well,
was
I have a feeling that's going to change, my friend.
maybe, who knows? But
Let's hope.
that'd be nice. But
Yeah.
at the time, it really took a while. But then I just remembered at a concert one night, I was drinking a beer in the balcony by myself, and I was like, oh my God, this music as a composer is not even on my program. And I was just like, wow, this is amazing. I'm having such a moment. And then I thought, hey, well, this is what I do. I play music. I create these moments. And it just like dawned on me, like I actually have some money that I can maybe do something with. And it's not just going to like vaporize in a second. I'll forget about it. I can actually like maybe do a thing. It was scary though, because once you send an email to anybody saying you're going to give them money, you're giving them money. You're not you're not saying, you know what, I changed my mind. Or the pandemic happened right after, being like, you know what, 10 grand sounds good right about now, because I don't even know if I'm playing a concert ever again. You know? And so there was a bit of waiting. I was waiting to see if this idea of using this money to commission new work, I kind of waited for a while to see if I was going to like get tired of that idea, or if it was going to seem stupid after a while. And it just never happened. And finally I just was like, oh, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, those are usually the best ones. It sticks with you and you go. But also, a lot of times in the show, we'll talk about when there's absence, you kind of have to circle the wagons and pull people together. And I think that besides legacy, what you're leaving with this album, this beautiful album, Grammy nominated album, you circle the wagons. You got friends and composers together and everybody. And two of the people, Chris and Missy, also lost their fathers in this process, which is so sad. But
they did. And Dev Hynes also lost his mother, Blood Orange, who also goes by Blood Orange. He lost his mother after he wrote that piece. So some people, like, I think their relationship with their work, and Sarah Kirkland Snyder, who has a piece called The Plum Tree I Planted Still There, she lost her father before it. And so a lot of these composers, though, had their relationships with these pieces sort of changed, sort of similar. They had to kind of keep talking about them.
Yeah.
They had to keep sort of like experiencing them. And so, but their versions of these pieces and their impressions of these pieces really changed over the course of this project sort of being out there and them sort of living their lives. I have to interrupt you because and you can edit this out, but I'm just curious about your story and how you came. Maybe your listeners all know this, but I'm curious about like how you came to this and what's going on in your situation, in your world.
Yeah, for me, I lost my dad when I was 3 years old. My mom never remarried. And I just I have an older sister, and I grew up in New York City, and we just kind of, as a triumvirate, just kind of figured it out together. And, as later in life, I'm almost 40, I'll be 45 next year, but I have 2 young children, 2 young daughters, and my worldview has changed so much. There are so many things, Adam, that I wish I just had a heads up on. And that's sort of my mantra for the show, whether it's extrapolating through conversations like this or actually doing some how-to stuff. I want to give just even one person the chance to learn that thing, to give them the heads up on that thing that I didn't have, that just would have saved me some time and trouble and a ton of trial and error, because between us and everybody else, my whole life has been built on trial and error. I have made mistakes over and over again, and I've always been a late bloomer. And I guess timing is what you make of it, and things work out when they're supposed to. But that was really the impetus for the show. And I've always been a writer, an actor, a producer, and this was sort of my way to carve out something, to have creative autonomy of my own, because as you know, sometimes they're gatekeepers and your hands get tied.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
So
do you think you would have had less trial and error with your father alive?
I don't know. I couldn't say. Maybe not. Certain things, maybe. But what I've given a lot of thought to, and what I've talked about quite a bit, is that fatherlessness comes in all shapes and sizes. your old man could be around and he's
Yeah,
really not
totally.
there.
Totally.
And, or he could be the sweetest guy in the world and he just can't give you what you need because you don't connect. So it's that's really the story, the elevator pitch.
No, it is important. And I think just like you're saying, fatherlessness comes in many forms. So does grief.
Yeah,
I
of
actually
course.
find when people connect to this project of mine, which sort of centers on grief, I actually, again, am more gratified sometimes when people are grieving a place or grieving a
Yeah.
relationship or grieving something that's not necessarily death, but
Yeah.
that they're grieving, they're adjusting to a change. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of grief sometimes is a resistance, and it's a reaction to the most profound of changes, and it's
Yeah.
sort of a rage against that. It can take all these kinds of forms. I mean, I I should say my mother remarried too, and so it's interesting. I grew up with a stepfather who's
Yeah.
actually very loving, and to this day is very loving. But even that relationship um, went through so many different sort of iterations of me sort of like resenting him, being like, "Well, you're not.
Mhm.
I don't know what you're doing here." Like, so me being a real punk for a while to him, to being like not. And this is when I came out of the closet, which was quite late. It was for me. I was 20. I was
Yeah.
25,
Mhm.
but he was a construction worker, and he still
Yeah.
to this day works. He's like a salt of the earth kind of guy in Vermont. Like, still works in construction, still works with his hands. And I grew up in a pretty, and even before I just grew up in like a pretty like homophobic, for lack of better words,
Yeah.
like home. And I'll never forget even him once saying, like, I would disown a gay son, and I with my stepdad say that, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, okay. And I remembered
Yeah.
like watching The Sopranos with them, and like, The Sopranos, everything happens, but like the one thing
Sure.
that they would cover their eyes were like the Vito gay scenes. And I was like,
Right.
I'm not coming out around here. Like this,
Right. Right.
this isn't happening. Um, and so even though he loved me to death, I
Yeah.
still felt like, I don't know. I can't. I'm still going to disappoint this person, or worse.
Yeah.
And when I finally did, well, the interesting, but it's actually quite sad. He felt so ashamed
Mhm.
of presenting that way. And I lived in
Yeah.
Texas at the time, and I remember his first reaction was like, "You'd be home if I didn't say those things. You'd be home if I
Ugh.
didn't." And I was
Yeah.
like, "No, I wouldn't. Don't do that to yourself either."
Yeah.
But it's an interesting thing because I feel like in that moment, and he knew my pain. And every time I ever talk
Yeah.
about bullying, or every time I ever talk about sort of being targeted, or about still wrestling with sort of the demons of
Mhm.
the trauma of that time of my life, even my mom is sort of like, "God, I had no idea." And I'm like, "Well, of course you don't, because I was ashamed of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to disappoint you all, and I certainly don't want to disappoint you all by copping to that I'm this thing that is abhorrent to everybody around me."
Yeah.
So, um,
Such a shame.
it is, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like things like that if one is lucky and this doesn't happen it can whip people around to be like, shape up, because
Yeah.
you could lose your son forever. So it's like,
Yeah.
there's
Sure.
one thing about being fatherless, but you could also be childless,
Yeah.
and children disown their parents all the time. And
Yeah.
so it was a really interesting thing to sort of like almost repair this relationship, even with my stepfather, who I think had presented in such a different way growing up, and then to watch him sort of melt and become sort of the most effusive, supportive, loving person in my life. He's still not my biological dad, so there was stuff to repair there. But
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, fatherlessness takes many forms, and the needs of a fatherless child, so to speak, can also take many forms. I was seeking father figures my whole life,
Yeah.
and wondering what that meant. What
Mhm.
is this okay? I'm obsessed with this teacher. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Like, or I'm obsessed with this best friend of mine. Are they fathering me?
Yeah.
And so it's a complicated thing. And not to circle back to me all with this project,
Please
but
do. Yeah.
there's something about taking something that's so complex and so hard to even put into words and be like, okay, well, I'm going to match it with music, which
Yeah.
is complex and there's no words, like it's actually, like you say, like how do people connect with this thing? There's no real words, but and so on. Well, that might be part of it, because
Yeah.
the blanks get filled in, and with the person who's listening themselves, and it becomes sort
Yeah.
of like their thing. And so it's maybe one of the more powerful things of this thing is that it's so, in a way, non-specific. That said,
Yeah.
in the last talking too much, but the thing is, like,
Not at all.
the I found with this project, because when I first came into it, I was like, I'm not showing home videos. I'm not going to be on stage and there's going to be home videos. And it's not going to be about me, blah, 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 blah. Of course, now there is. But the more personal I made it, and the more vulnerable I made this project, and the more I made it about, like, truly my experience, the more people actually made it theirs. And I thought I didn't know that could happen. I really came into it being like, listen, the more abstract I make this, and the more impersonal I make it, the more universal it will be, because it's not going to be about me. And it's actually the opposite, because the more risky I made it for myself to be as vulnerable as I was, even just playing other people's music, the more people kind of gave themselves permission to sort of to take down their walls. And that's, I think, part of what happens when people experience this work.
Yeah, you become an emotional lead. You say you have, the stones that you have to put yourself out there like this. Really, I mean, it's a little crass, but
no,
it takes real bravery to put everything out there like this. And I think that seeing those home videos, listening to the album on Spotify and seeing the home videos with it, seeing you as a young boy.
That's so cool that you did that. Yeah, that was
of course. Yeah, it was great. And and seeing that, like, you could see that, your dad taught, even in the piece on CBS, your dad speaking, like,
yeah.
I don't mean to overstep or speak for you or him, but it seemed like you could feel his pride for you in those moments. And that was really great.
And I didn't know, I hadn't really been thinking about those videos. I didn't really even know that existed until I was digging for that piece. And so it's sort of how this whole project sort of led me to humanizing this figure who, until then, I'd really sort of cast into a pretty zeros and ones binary thing of, like, absent or not, like,
right.
this relationship is this or that. And it really was like, no, he was at that birthday party, or he was videotaping me play the piano and being, like, obnoxious, like, he was videotaping me playing with my toys. And so I was like, oh, this is actually, there's more happening here. And it's interesting to say emotional guide, because I think that's when I'm playing this program live, or whether it's on the album, I think that's a really beautiful, I'm going to remember that, because I do think that is sort of my role. I'm not really up there as a performer showing off, like, look what I can do. This is so great. I'm so amazing. It's more like, I'm taking you here. I'm going to, like, join me here, because that's also part of it. Like, I'm not like throwing you over there. I'm going there with you, and you should come with me. It's that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and also what I wanted to ask you as well is, after these shows, I mean, how do you do it emotionally? It's like a Broadway performer doing the death of a salesman or something. You're emoting so much every single night. How does it must zap you?
I'll be honest with you. It's a very weird feeling, and it's one that I'm almost ashamed to say that oftentimes I get a little embarrassed. Like, I feel almost like, well, like, people just saw a very vulnerable side of me. And I know that there's no choice but to do that and to go there. But when it's over, it's sort of like, what did you just see? Like, what did I say? Like, it's like post-coital, like, shit, what did I do?
Yeah. What the hell
did I tell you to
just
choke
happened?
me? No. It's sort of like, it's that. It's sort of like, and I will spend the next kind of day or two, it's not going to be so kind of in the pocket, but to say grieving, but sort of like kind of shell-shocked, being like, whoa, my, like, 7th grade teacher was there, or whoa, like, my aunt was there and she saw me, like, I punched the piano, or I'm, like, doing these gestures with them. Like, certain things happen in this program that are really, really, like, intense. And in the moment, I'm a pretty self-conscious person, but whenever I'm performing and playing the piano, it's I'm very rarely thinking about how I look, what I'm doing. Like it's the one place, that's probably why I do it, where the only thing that matters is exactly what I'm doing in that moment. I'm not thinking about my personal life. I'm not thinking about my dinner, ideally. And I'm not thinking about and I'm not thinking about the optics of it all. Like I'm not thinking about how messy I look or this or that. But when sort of it's like 4 a.m. at the club, when the lights come on at the end of those shows, it's sort of like, whoa, all right, everybody out kind of a thing. And so that's the emotional toll it sometimes takes, where I kind of have to snap back. And part of it is like, everyone just saw me like really exposed, and having to just sort of to make peace with that. And that's what I wrestle with the most, actually.
I would say, not that you need my to give you solace here, but I think that's what people are signing up for.
Yeah.
I think people, I mean, when you look at the zeitgeist and the landscape right now culturally, there are so few things that are so substantive and authentic that, you go, well, thank God you're doing something like that draws that response.
I appreciate that. And the stuff like the CBS and the Grammy nomination and these stuff that happened, like the New York Times article, all these things, it's really still at the end of the day a family affair. I don't have, you emailed me, I emailed you back, and we're talking. Like there's no like firewall of a team. There's no, this nomination didn't happen because of like a PR campaign. It's really, that's what's also really kind of amazing about it, is that like, and I'm not part of the Recording Academy. It's not like I'm like, oh, I'm going to get all my Recording Academy friends to vote for this, not because that's how it works. You don't just like do something great and then you get a nomination. You sort of like have to get votes from Recording Academy people to get a nomination. So I knew that day was, I knew the day it was announced. I knew that was the day of the nomination, but I was very much managing my expectations, because I'm like, I don't have, I don't know. So everything that's happened with this project has been really because of people responding like how you're describing, where I think that they get what's happening here and they see that it's real. They see that it's messy and complicated and authentic. And that's the end of it. But at the end of the day, also the music's really good. Like the music's really cool, and you don't have to like have a PhD in avant-garde music to get it. And that's what I think is actually sort of the miracle of this program, is that it hits. It really just hits.
It really, it does. And I love jazz, so I'm not totally, ignorant to instrumental music, but, some of the stuff you do is so interesting and different than anything I've ever heard. You have a new fan, because it's really great. It's enjoyable.
Well, you have a new fan in me too. I find what you're doing to be really, really important, and especially like with, I'm sure you interview all people, but like I think men in general also have like tricky ways of talking about some of this stuff. My husband, he lost his father when he was very young. They had a very kind of nonverbal, really not a very close relationship. And even just the other night, we were home in seeing my mom and my stepdad in Vermont for Thanksgiving, and he was talking to me about something his mother said about his father. He just talked for like 20 minutes, which is unusual for even him. And I just thought, wow, our relationships with our fathers, for men sometimes, can be really, really hard to sort of like parse and figure out, and sort of it takes a lot of time to sometimes to process these relationships, because often we don't have spaces to talk about them. So I applaud you for creating one, and I hope people will keep talking to you about it, because and keep listening, because
thank you.
There's a lot of prisms here. There's a lot of like sides and shades to this prism, and no one's story is the same. But I think it can help people to sort of like just feel less alone.
Yeah, and when I try to keep it sort of loose and sort of light, and provide that space, if you will, to just say what you have to say, and because I think you have to let that open up that steam valve, and I think that's what you're doing for a lot of people with this program, with this album. And boy, we're gonna be rooting for you for the Grammy.
Well, one more question for you. I know you're we're wrapping up, but
no, I have one more for you as well. I have one more for you.
Okay, well, my question for you is like, when you're speaking to so many people about fatherhood, and
Yeah.
fatherlessness, does it like inform your experience as a father? I know people come to my shows, and a lot of the people who have the most really emotional experiences aren't people who have experienced loss, but who are fathers now.
Yeah.
And they're sort of seeing the other side of things. And so I'm wondering your experience of like talking to people about this. If
Absolutely. 100%. Everything, conversation I have, generally speaking, I've always sort of been, a searcher. I've always been looking for more information on how to live, and I think that sort of plugs into the void that I had. And I
mm,
had have a wonderful single mom who just
yeah.
tried so much, but there's a vacuum there where
Yeah.
she can't do everything. So yes, to answer your question, I look at things through a different lens. I also, when you grew up fatherless, with such a loss at a young age, you're not sure if you're gonna be around for forever or young.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's it's complicated. There's a lot of stuff there, but yes, I do. I try to answer questions as much as I can and get better
That's
every day about
that's
at
really
being a father.
interesting. You're thinking about
Yeah.
mortality at an age when maybe you're not really supposed to.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. And I mean, 5-year-olds shouldn't smoke and drink either. I mean, I could have stopped that, but no,
oh wow.
I'm just kidding. No,
Well, for
it
instance,
was New
though,
York City in the 80s,
yeah, totally. Well, I mean, when you say it, that like my parents were divorced from as far back as I could remember, and
Yeah,
so my experience as a child of parents is and marriage is that it is that it's fragile and
fragile,
that it
yeah.
breaks. And so
Mhm.
my experience of what marriage was, even at my earliest memories, was, well, it's impermanent. It
Yeah,
doesn't, it actually, like, they're not there. They were married. And that was
yeah,
like, so it's a similar thing in a way. It's not as maybe as traumatic as a death, but it's still sort of like, well, there's this thing that's fractured. And
yeah,
children, when they grow up in a house that's sort of split, and they were divorced, but like in and out, so it's chaotic in a way.
yeah,
So my experience of matrimony was like one of kind of unpredictability and things that were fractured and fragile.
yeah,
And same with if you're growing up and you're thinking about death every day because you're met with the loss of a parent every
sure.
day. It makes you actually think about mortality when when most kids aren't.
Yeah, and I always say this. I always say everybody's got a big bag of problems, and I don't want anybody else's. I will take my own. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good
Thank
way
you
to think
very
about
much.
it.
But I just wanna ask you one more thing, and I know your dad's name was Gary,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanna know, it's this thing we do on the show each week. It is my old man used to say, is there something that Gary told you, a piece of wisdom, something that you'd
Oh
love to
my
hear from
God.
him, didn't love to hear, just something that you still hold with you?
Well, he, you know what? I was gonna say one thing. I will say that the line that he said to me that was, I think, the strangest and weirdest and funniest thing that he had said in a long time, which is the title track. When the first track of the album was, I had played a concert, and he said afterward, he said he saw that I was like feeling great about myself. I was like, I don't know, 24 or something. He was like, well, remember, I created you. And I was just like, okay. Like, I was like, I know. For better or worse, believe me,
Yeah.
I know. And but I think about that all the time. I think, well, you created me. And it's a kind of an amazing thing to say. He was not a person who would dig at anybody. He would like to
Mhm.
nudge. He had been sort of like politically radicalized. So when I'd
Mhm.
be around him, he'd be like, well, what about de Blasio? What do you think? I
Mm.
knew he was trying to fight with me, like it
Right.
was always that. But but it was never like nefarious or
Mhm.
nasty. It was just like, just remember, like, you're on that stage, but you're part of me, and
Yeah.
I might be floating in and out of your life, but like in this kind of like shadowy figure, but you are of my blood. And
Yeah.
I think about that all the time, especially I think in my moments where I'm like at my worst,
Mhm.
frankly, where I would be short to like disavow myself or not forgive
Mhm.
myself. I think, well, I'm my father's son. Someone's been here before me. Like, we are all imperfect. Like, I'm not this perfect version of my father. I'm his son. I'm an imperfect. So that line really will be with me for the rest of my life. But I will say this, because I tried a couple times the thing where I would call him and we talk, and it was always like, even for his birthday or my birthday, we talk for like a minute and a half tops.
Yeah.
And his biggest concern, and this is such a boring answer, but he was always like, "Are you healthy?" It was always that. It was like, "Are you healthy? Are you healthy? Are you healthy?" And I would say yes. He's like, "All right, great."
Yeah.
I think I think that, like, I think I would tell him that. Or if anything, I would talk to him about that, and I would assure him that that's okay. And his main concern was like, "Are you healthy? Because if you're not, I need to step in." I think he saw as an adult that is functioning in the world. I think he really saw, and I don't think this is a great thing, and I don't think it's a true thing, but I do think that he saw that his jurisdiction as a father ended with me as an adult. You're an adult, you're fine. I'm not your dad anymore. You're a grown up. You don't need a dad. And I really think that that was part of like his subconscious mentality of like, you're cool. Like, what do you need a father for? You're not a kid. And so I really felt like that was sort of his attitude. And that's why I think we drifted, because I didn't need him. And he would constantly, I think that was sort of the basis of our calls, was like, are you healthy? Subtext, do you need me?
Yeah.
And I would be, and on that very objective level of like, are you healthy? Are you okay? The answer is, well, yes. And then it was like, all right, bye. That means you don't need me, right? And so I think that that's something I'll always remember. And I do think that like, even if he was alive and I did inheritances, I think his investment would be, I love you, but you must not need me, because you're doing great. You're doing okay. And I think that's something that I'll continue to sort of like make peace with, because it's actually not a good or a bad thing. It's just how he was. I think he could be proud from afar, impressed from afar, but mostly just like, I'm your father. I'm happy you're okay, you know?
Yeah.
And I think even with all its limits and imperfections, that's who he was, and that was his mindset. And so that's really what I remember actually the most. It's like not a very sexy answer, but it was really, he would always ask if I was healthy, how's your health? And seconds later, the conversation would be over.
Yeah. And that was just his way, though. I mean, we are unavoidably ourselves, and that was his way to say, you know, I love you, kid. You know, you're healthy, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're tough. If the, you know, people are just, we have our stuff, and we cannot get away from it. So
no, as hard the faster we run, the faster it runs.
That sounds about right. On that, we're gonna wrap it up. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Great to chat with you.
Thank you,
guys. I hope you enjoyed this. This was the Fatherless Cheat Sheet. We'll see you next time. All right, take care.